be like, so this is going to be an interesting experience, because for me, usually when we have done these workshops, it has been very interactive, and certain advantages that you have of live interaction, we do not have now. So, so what I would like to do is that I would like to sort of lay down some of the broad, sort of arguments I want to make in this, which is basically drawn from a very long standing feminist engagement, right? Both of feminist movements and of feminist academia on these questions of development, patriarchy, how does it work together, etc. So I will sort of lay down a certain set of arguments, drawing from some of the recent debates, like of news which has kind of gone viral, or which has made sort of some impact in our very high turnover, present, and then draw attention to some of these issues which emerge from it, and after which I would really like it if it becomes, an interaction, if there are questions, etc. So that's what I'm going to follow. Okay. Now, when we talk about, I give a very brief introduction on what do I mean by gender and development, and after that, I will look at these specific sort of cases that I'm taking. Okay. So when we talk about development, what do we really mean? Okay, it seems to be, and it is a positive word, right? It's a very nobody can have a problem with wanting to develop. Okay, so it has that positive currency. Okay, how do we understand this? Okay, conventionally, when we talk about development, we talk about a few things which all seem to go together. We talk about growth rates, we talk about GDP, we talk about jobs and employment, and we link all of these to a better quality of life, a better standard of living. Okay, right? We think of ourselves as developed when we reach some of these parameters. Okay, so to talk about development means to, in a sense, to talk about growth, income, in raising incomes, okay, creating jobs, okay, improving lifestyles, and hence it would mean, right, that there is a vision here, okay, and a set of policies through which this vision is going to be achieved. Okay. So typically, when we talk about development, we are talking about certain patterns of resource allocation. We want resources to be distributed in a certain manner, given to certain places. Okay, right? Now, and we want it to be a situation where more people are employed and are earning more, okay, and creating greater wealth for the society. Okay? Now, where does gender come into this picture? A conventional approach would be, okay, the conventional question here would be, how do we get women to work? How do we get women to, be more a part of the economy? Okay, how do we get women to do jobs? Okay, how much of the jobs are going to women? How do we get them to actually be part of this? Okay, so the typical understanding would be getting them into the development story, and this concerned, right, a lot of people, and we see very mainstream, very powerful, influential people, okay, making this a very big concern, okay, from people in the IMF to World Bank to important agencies, sustainable development goals that we are all, in the pursuit of. All of these prioritize, okay, the idea that women need to be more a part of the workforce. Okay, it is good for women and it is good for the economy. It is good for wealth creation, etc. So that is a conventional sort of question, and then problems are around this question. Okay. Now, what I am going to do is I am going to problematize the way in which we ask this question. Okay, what do we do when we ask this question? Which is, why are women not working? How do we get them to work? Okay, how do we make sure that they are part of this growth story, this economic story, etc.? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to problematize this. Okay, which does not mean that I don't think women should be working. Okay, right? But I'm just going to see what goes into, okay, asking questions like this. Okay, so asking about gender and development then would mean to pursue two kinds of questions. One is when we adopt certain policies, when we have a vision, okay, what is the impact of that on different people in society? Therefore, what is the impact of that on, okay, gender relations in society? Okay, what is the impact of policies and visions, okay, programs, processes of change on, okay, on women? Of course, women who are differentiated in many different ways, right, from region to community. Okay, but what is the impact of that? The second question would be, when we think about development or socio-economic change, okay, what are the assumptions that we take? Okay? Are there certain assumptions, gender-based assumptions that we work with? Okay? What are these assumptions? And what do these assumptions tell us about our constructions of development? Okay? So to sum up, to talk about gender and development means to, one, look at the impact of, okay, development policies as they are framed, that is their vision, okay, and as they are framed and as they are implemented, okay, on, okay, gender relations in society. So it doesn't just mean impact on men, women, but on gender relations in society. And second, okay, to study the assumptions, okay, within which these policies are made. Are there certain assumptions? Are there certain constructions, okay, of gender which are behind these? Okay, so this is going to be, I'll come back to these questions, okay, and because right now it sounds like all abstract, but I'm going to now see how we can flesh this out. Okay, so I'm going to right now just share my screen. Okay. And I hope you can, see this.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm starting with something which all of you, and I heard that number of you are doing media studies, etc., would be familiar with. Okay. Which is that sometime in early January this year, okay, when the farmers' movement was at its peak, as it were, okay, and it became a question in front of the courts, the Supreme Court Chief Justice of India, okay, Chief Justice Bobde, okay, made certain remarks. He said, I do not know, I do not understand why women are kept in these protests. Okay, we know that on the borders of Delhi, on a number of locations, there are actual cities which have come up. People have been camping there for many months now. Okay, when in January, it was already going to hit 2 months. Okay, and the Chief Justice said that, okay, I don't understand why women are kept in these protests. He wanted the representatives of farmers' organizations to give an undertaking that, women will be actually persuaded to leave the protests and go back to their homes. Okay. Now this became quite viral, so to speak. Okay, and it prompted a number of arguments and critiques, etc. He also, of course, talked about old people. Now, what is the underlying assumption here? The underlying assumption seems to be, okay, not only that women are not citizens and they cannot be part of protests, okay, right, but women are not farmers. Okay, it is a farmers' protest. Why are women there? Why are they not going back to their families? Okay, so there was a sort of basic distinction being made here between women and farmers, and this is while the Chief Justice, then Chief Justice, was quite notorious for making a number of such comments. His comment was not really something which was, a rare one. Okay? In the run-up to the farmers' protest, we did see a number of people commenting on, see, so many women have come in. Okay? They are expressing solidarity. Okay? How do you express solidarity with yourself? So if you're expressing solidarity, that means you are not part of the movement. You are another constituency and you are expressing solidarity. Okay? Right? So this was not a one-off comment is what I'm trying to say. Now look at the second slide. This is the Women's Day, 8th of March this year, okay, right before the second wave sort of burst on us, okay, in one location out of these various locations where the protest is taking place, okay, and I can give you a guarantee that everybody under this tent in this photograph are women. Okay, so it was a program which was meant to mark Women's Day. Okay, and only women were part of this. Men, if they were there, but they were not supposed to be within the frame, right? It was supposed to be a program participating. The audience was women. The stage was managed by women. Okay, and apparently there was just one male speaker on this stage who just basically gave the vote of thanks. Okay, estimates vary. It is clearly 1 lakh plus, okay, of people who are under this particular location, and the Women's Day was marked, of course, by in other locations as well. What does this tell us? Okay? And it's a fascinating photograph, right? Right. So what does this tell us? Have these women come as farmers? Are they farmers? Okay. And if they are farmers, why was Chief Justice saying why are they kept in the protests? Okay. We have enough data now, okay, right? Many sources calculating different kinds of data. A lot of it now we need updating because the 2021 census is yet to be done. But a lot of data, okay, which actually gives certain startling sort of results, okay. According to estimates, okay, 65% of all women in India who are classified as workers, that is, they are counted by, okay, right, our national accounting systems as workers are women. 65% of women workers, okay, like all the women who are counted as workers, of them 65%, okay, engage in agriculture, either as cultivators or as laborers. And 73%, some estimates say 75% of rural women, okay, rural women who are accounted as workers, okay, are engaged in agriculture, again as cultivators or as laborers. Now use this, okay, and then think about that photograph before, okay, that they are doing farming, okay, but this photograph startled us because we are not used to seeing women as farmers. The idea of a farmer conjures up a picture in our head where we basically do not see a female body. We tend to see a certain kind of body, okay. Some other estimates, for instance, Oxfam points out that women spend 3,300 hours, okay, of a crop season doing farm work, whereas men spend 1,860 hours, okay, right? About 75% of all farm-related work are done by women, okay? And this does not account for a lot of work which is done as farm work because that escapes calculation. And we'll come to that as to why, okay? So when women work, a lot of that is not counted. Our systems of statistical counting do not yet manage to capture it, okay? And yet, look at the other picture. The majority of workers, more time, okay, is women. And yet, in agriculture, women earn far less than men, okay, about 1.4 times less than men, okay? And all of these are averages across India. So you will see shifts, okay? And women own only about 13%, a little less than 13% of agricultural land in India. Even this 13% is actually a, average. Okay? The areas where there is massive protest against the farm laws, women actually own much less. In Uttar Pradesh, I think it is some 7%. In Punjab and Haryana, it's less than 1%. So less than 1% of women actually own land. And here it means owning land either individually or in as a joint property. The place where women have the highest ownership of land, it is in Lakshadweep. Okay, about 37% or so. And remember, Lakshadweep is again under a great, under our news radar now, because the administrator there is desperately trying to bring in development. That is, he's trying to bring in tourism, he's trying to change systems of land in the island. And that is the place where actually women have greater control over land. Now, what does all of this, tell us? It points us to two kinds of things. When we talk about people doing work, what do we have in our mind? And second, doing work is different from controlling the conditions of work, having control over the work that one is doing. So there is a distinction. More women do agricultural work. Studies point out, for instance, that with increasing migration, it is a gendered migration. More men migrate, fewer women migrate. So more agricultural work is actually done by women. It is a term for it called feminization of agriculture as well. Right? So more work, not seen as work, but also no control over work. And that means lesser ability to decide. To not have land means to not have access to credit. That is why the state doesn't even see you as a farmer, because the state is not engaging with you when it is giving loans, when it is buying the crop. Right? So all these three farm laws, the state, if you look at the details of it, you will see that it is not gender neutral. Now, this is the bulk of the work, as it were, done in India. Now let's move ahead to another thing. Let's move outside of agriculture. Now I've put in here two images which again sort of went viral over the past few months. One is very recent, which is to do with the vaccination drive in Jharkhand. And you can see here, this is a health worker. The name for that for this health worker is Asha, right? So the Asha workers, and she's knee deep in water, with a baby on her back, her baby, trying to reach a destination, in order to inoculate someone, in order to administer the COVID vaccine. Right? So which means that she can handle the syringe. She knows how to do the COVID. She knows how to give a vaccination, and she is undertaking this task. Look at the other side, the other image. And the other image, again, it is a video, it's a grab of a video, which actually, again, made a lot of news some time back. And the video grab is basically of a cop, a traffic cop, who was reprimanded by her superiors, asking why is she not being able to turn up properly and regularly for work? She had just given birth, and she turns up therefore with her child to give birth. Now there could be no, like these two women, there is a whole world dividing them, right? To be a cop means to have at the minimum what? A government job, which is the sort of most prized job in India. It comes with the highest income in many ways, right? Apart from the very high paying corporate jobs which are there, it is a high income job. It comes with security, okay, right? It is also a job in which you will find lesser women. Okay, why? Because this job is classified as a skilled job requiring certain qualifications. Okay, and we are not even now used to seeing too many traffic cops who are female on the roads. Okay, again, the image that will come of the traffic cop in our head is more likely to be someone who's a male. Okay, right. On the other hand, we have the ASHA worker. The ASHA worker is not even classified as a worker. So she will not actually be counted as a worker, right? The official classification is volunteer. Okay, they are supposed to be volunteers. Okay, and in the past few months, you would have noticed the news. There will be often news about ASHA workers protesting in one part of the country or the other. Okay, because with COVID, their tasks have expanded. Okay, and many of them were promised some kind of additional allowance. They were not given that allowance. Many people have died, okay, of COVID because they have contracted it on duty. Even outside of COVID, okay, estimates say that there are at least 70 to 75 duties which are counted as duties of the ASHA workers in different states and union territories in India. This is outside of COVID related duties, which would mean checking quarantine facilities, making sure vaccinations are done, right? Okay, ensuring that medicines, hospital, etc. are reached, etc., etc., etc. Okay, they are paid an honorarium. Can you, if we like guess, okay, how much they would pay? Okay, whatever guess we come up with would, unless we have the information, would fall low. Okay, typically an ASHA worker is paid between 2 to 4,000 rupees per month. That's it. Okay, and I said there are about 75 tasks plus COVID related tasks. Okay, much of their work is according to incentives. That is how many number of people whom they have contacted, how many children whom they have got, inoculated, how many people whom they have distributed contraception, etc. To. Okay, so look at the contrast in this image. These two women could not be more unlike. Okay? One has a good, well-paying job. Okay, right? And the other has a job which is given only to women. These accredited workers are basically women. Okay, one's job is classified as a valuable, skilled male job, which women can also do. So if women do it, then it means that, see, they have reached excellence. The other person's job is classified as feminine. Okay, right? It's about community-oriented work. It's not really work. No, typically, it would be seen as not really work. Okay, people. That's why it's an honorarium. Okay, you are not supposed to be paid for it because it is not considered work. You're doing it because it seems like a natural extension of wherever you are. Okay, so these two women could not be more unlike. But see the commonality, which is, despite all the variations, they are the primary, caregivers of their children. The well-paying cop cannot find someone to take care of her child. The ASHA worker obviously cannot find someone to take care of her child. Okay, right? The well-paying one perhaps could have employed someone. The ASHA worker in 4,000 or 2,000 or whatever cannot even do that. Okay. Now this trend you can actually see not just in India, okay, but across the world. So across the world and across different work areas, okay, right? You find even high achieving sort of women who are extremely qualified, okay, who are doing those high-end jobs, okay, right, are more likely, in fact, to be childless. Okay? If they are there, they are more likely to be childless. They are more likely to be unmarried. Okay? There was one top CEO who said, female CEO who was asked what is the secret of reaching, at the top of her career, and she said, well, there's only one sort of advice I would give to women who want to, which is to marry late and marry a man who already has children. Okay, and this is a story of USA. So it's not even a story in our third world contexts. Okay, so where does that leave us? What does it point out to us? Okay, there are two kinds of things that emerge. One is that if we do calculation on how many women are part of the labor force, then there are very few women. In India, women's participation in the labor force has actually been falling in the past 30 years instead of increasing, which does not mean that women are not working. But our models of capturing what is work cannot, get at what women are doing and what they are, how they are doing. And second, it is pointing out to a phenomena called unpaid work. Okay? Since like 100 years at least, okay, feminist movements have pointed out to this, a category called unpaid work. Work that is different from a wage. So labor that is done, work that is done, but it does not actually fetch a wage. And hence, it is invisible, but it is assumed. Okay? What is this unpaid work? How would we calculate this unpaid work? Okay. I'm looking at the third sort of, again, thing which made news over the past few months. Okay. In the run-up to the elections, this round of assembly elections, okay, Kamal Hassan, an actor and now like a political, party chief, okay, brought out in the manifesto of his political party, okay, the idea that homemakers, okay, or housewives should be paid a salary by the state. Okay, and this was followed up by intense discussion. Okay, many other political parties scrambled to include some kind of allowance for housewives in their manifestos. Okay, people spoke for it. Okay, someone like Shashi Tharoor, for instance, said it's an idea that it's a time for this idea to have come, and people spoke against it. Okay? Making it laughable, saying, how do you, actually even calculate housework, and why would you monetize housework? And isn't housework done out of either love or duty or both? How do you distinguish between duty and love? Okay, right? So it became much of a discussion, right? But in bringing this discussion, okay, something was pointed out, which is, okay, and I'm coming back to this, the idea of unpaid work. Now, unpaid work is that which is actually not included in our GDP calculations. So if you measure development primarily by how much growth there is and how much wealth there has been created, how much value there has been added, then a whole lot of work doesn't get counted in it. So unpaid work is not counted in GDP. And why? Because it is not considered productive work. Right? Our notion of what is productive is linked to the idea of what fetches a wage. But it is also linked to the idea of what is valuable work, what is good work. Right? Again, in the past few in the past couple of decades, actually, this idea of unpaid work has provoked a lot of research. People have tried to answer, okay, how do we, if we have to calculate, how do we calculate? Okay? And they found that it is not just possible to, make a measure. How do you make a measure? Okay? Can we list all the work that is done in keeping life going? Okay? Can we think about it as domestic work done in the household? Okay? But what would this domestic work and work done in the household be? Like I pointed out, a whole lot of women worked in family-owned farms. A lot of their work would be counted, actually, would not be counted. It would be unpaid work. Okay. So what would this work be? Would it be farming? Okay. Would it be collecting fuel, fodder, going to the forest and, sort of collecting herbs, fruits, products, okay, collecting water for cooking, for cleaning, or the very activities of cooking, cleaning, okay, childcare, taking care of older people, teaching children, changing the light bulb, changing the nappy, okay, what would all of this go? And here, childcare does not just mean to caring for young children. Okay? The Indian government, for instance, has now a program. I mean, has a scheme for its for female employees. Okay, where they are allowed 2 years, up to 2 years of leave. Okay, right? What is called childcare leave, to take care of children up to the age of 18. And the main reason is either to take care of them when they are sick, or to take care of them when they are giving these high pressure examinations, 10th boards, 12th boards, typically 12th boards. And most women take the leave at that, around that time, because these are considered very high pressure examinations for children and you have to coach them, etc. Okay? So if you put all this work together, okay, what kind of estimation would it be? Okay, a lot of people, like a lot of economists, and this is mainstream economists now, like economists of the World Bank, etc., argue that, okay, if included in GDP, this would be about 15 to 50% from one country to another of the GDP. So maybe about half of value that is created is not counted at all, okay, in our calculations. And this is because we do not consider it sort of productive. What kind of estimation do we have? Just look at some of the data I have put here. Okay. Usually when I am there for the workshop, I ask people, how many minutes do you think, people spend doing household work? Okay. And most often it's widely off the mark. Okay. So some of the data that we have here for India, this is basically for India. One is by the National Sample Survey Organization, which says that women spend about 300 minutes per day doing housework. Okay. And men spend correspondingly about 30 minutes per day, 1/10, right? So that means 90% of all total work, right? Unpaid work is, okay, by women. Okay. OECD, for instance, has a calculation quite similar. Okay, so 360 minutes per day for women and 36 minutes per day for men. It also says that, okay, women use most of the work that women have of this 6 hours is for housework, whereas most of the work that men do as part of this housework is basically shopping, traveling for household activities, etc. Okay, not being within the house, not doing caregiving activities, etc. This is a skewed distribution, okay, of work. And India is not unique in this. Okay? This is across the world. So across the world, 75% of unpaid care work is done by women. In high income countries as well. There are some high income countries where it is more equal, Norway and other Scandinavian countries, for instance. Okay? And India does worse than most countries. Okay? There are only some countries apparently of the Arab world which have a more skewed ratio than India does. Okay? And now look at the earned income. So 90% of unpaid work is done by women. Women earn 20% of what men earn on an average. Okay? So the lifetime earnings of women are way, way, way below par. And that is why you see all the other things that we talk about often. When we talk about gender, we often talk about dowry, and we talk about domestic violence, and we ask questions like, why do women stay in abusive relationships? Okay? Why cannot they leave? This gives you a sort of context. And on the other hand, what do we see here? Labor force participation, okay, has been dropping, and pretty drastically. Only 20% of women who are in the working age, okay, are in the labor force. And to be in the labor force means to be either working or to be looking for work. Okay? So a lot of things that they are doing is simply out of the radar. Okay? And it's like a cycle. It's like a vicious sort of cycle. More people are doing precarious work today than 30 years back. Okay, right? You would have noticed in reports on what has happened to the Uber drivers and the Zomato delivery people, etc. Okay, in the past year, because they were all self-employed, quote unquote. Okay, they were not employees. They never got a salary. Okay, they even owned the vehicle. It was their own vehicle for which they had a loan and they were paying installments. Okay, and you can see the skewedness there also. Who is doing it? Okay, and overall, what the conditions of that work are. Okay, so the questions then perhaps that we need to ask, and now I'll get back to some of the gender and development questions. Okay, the questions that we need to ask then is, okay, why is there this low labor force participation? Okay? If all that we need, okay, to grow, to become better, to have a fulfilling life is to work, get good jobs, okay? And meanwhile, remember that more Indian women are actually getting higher education. So the higher education levels of Indian women are near about equal to men. That is, out of the people who do higher education, near about 50% are women. And yet, look at the work participation. Okay. So why is there this low work participation? Okay. So one is, of course, the problem of calculation. Okay. In what is productive work. Okay. We have an understanding of productive work, which is very, very narrow, which is based on, okay, a male model of the economy, where work, okay, is separate from life, from the house. Okay. So we have a very narrow model. We do not count work, okay, and a lot of feminists right, argue that we do not count all that goes into what is called social reproduction. Okay? All that goes into making sure that people are alive, they're healthy, they're happy, they're nourished. Okay? They are tended to when they are sick. Okay? So we have a model where we have separated what goes into production of people or life from production of things. Production of things is valuable. Production of people, okay, is not. We don't even count it. Okay? And because we don't consider it valuable, what do? We need it. We can't survive without it. But because we don't consider it valuable, what happens? We manage to pass it on to people who are in situations of not making a choice. So what is considered as unproductive work is extremely important, without which life cannot take place. But it doesn't have any value, okay, in our system of values. That's why you will have women saying, I don't do anything. Okay? The persistent problem with calculation often apparently is that when typically an educated survey person, okay, goes to, okay, a whole range of small towns, villages, etc., and they ask, okay, what do you do? That's the way in which you make the calculation. Women are more likely to say, "Hum kuch nahi karte." Okay? Then you have to talk, and then you will find that from the morning to the night, what are the kinds of things which sort of go in. Right? And a lot of us also say that, oh, my mother was a housewife. Okay? So which means that our calculations are sort of different. Okay? So production of life and production of people, we have the production of things, we have separated. Okay? And most importantly, we have separated something called care. All human beings need care for long periods of time, consistently. A whole range of loneliness and desperation that so many people felt in the past sort of year is because we were not in, we weren't giving or taking care. Okay, so care is critical, but we devalue it. Okay, and when we devalue something, then what happens? We're able to get somebody to do it, and then tell them that they are worthless because they're doing that work. Okay, so we attach worthlessness to something like this. Okay, this unpaid work, okay, feminists argue, is a form of exploitation. It benefits people. It keeps the system running. Okay, to use a Marxist language, it is a form of surplus extraction. Somebody is doing the work and you take it away from them without compensating them in return. Okay. Remember, the ASHA worker is not even getting a minimum wage. And guess what the minimum wage is? Minimum wage in our country varies. Okay, it can be from anywhere to 8,000 to about 20,000 per month, depending on region and state, etc., and depending on work. We have three kinds of classifications when it comes to minimum wage: unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled. Okay, and a whole lot of work is which you will call housework, women's work. Farm labor is unskilled, classified as unskilled. Okay, the system puts it as unskilled. Okay, right? And there's a fancy division also for it. Unskilled is manual, physical work that doesn't require apparently intellectual activity, and skilled is something which requires some level of intellectual activity. So we have divided work according to that, okay? And where we, of course, okay, between physical and intellectual, what happens to the emotional? Sort of disappears. Okay? So the answer, okay, that is of this, why is there this, low wage participation, is because we have a problem in calculation, okay, and we have an unequal burden, okay, of unpaid work, okay, on some people according to different structures of power, but one major structure is gendered and therefore patriarchy. Okay? Okay? And this burden increases. It increases when there is economic distress, like in the last year. It increases when the state cuts on social services. It increases when the environment is degraded. Okay? So unequal work increases, like unpaid work increases the more all these other conditions happen. Okay? And all of this is shaped by what you would call as patriarchy. Okay? We have a very easy reference to patriarchy. But patriarchy works like this. Okay? It operates as a system. So if development was about resource allocation, then one of the major determining factors of resource allocation is patriarchy. And that works with, okay, what is called a sexual division of labor. What we think of work and labor and value and skills and wages, okay, or no wages, okay, is shaped according to sexual division of labor. Okay, so patriarchy through sexual division of labor decides who does what and what value it is accorded and what they will get in return for that. And if they do not do that, what kind of punishments, okay, would they have? And what kind of incentives would there be to do this kind of work? Okay. So to talk about gender and development in this connection, draw attention to some of these important things. Okay, right? And what we do see is, okay, and I'll conclude with this, okay, that this structure benefits patriarchy, this system benefits capitalism, this system benefits various other structures of power. How do we correct it? The idea of getting more women to work does not seem to be able to solve this. Okay, right? What it does do is it prevents what we will call self-determination. How do we live life on our terms? How does an individual live their lives on their terms? How do they become, those who decide on their own destiny? Okay, Amartya Sen called it, okay, expanding freedoms. Okay, how do people decide on doing things that they want to do rather than things that society tells them they have to do or they have no choice? Okay, to move from wages, income, okay, growth, wealth, to move to self-determination would require then a reorganization in society and reorganization in the family. Because you see here, the key thing, the family is what connects all this together. The family is the intermediate. So what is the new kind of family that we can think about? And what is the new kind of society? Can we have a different social organization with the same structure of the family? Can we have the same structure of the family, right? A different family with the same social organization, with this current distribution? Is it possible? Right? If they both go together, how would we then change it? Okay. Now, this last point would then lead us to ask, okay, another question. Why are we so fixated on work? Okay. Why do we think about the future, the good life only in terms of work? Okay. Can we move away from work to something else, which can be a marker of or an indicator of a good life? Okay. Are there other ways of thinking about well-being? Okay. And some of the sort of critical concepts which have been put forward are those which talk about post-work, which talk about basic income. Okay. So to disconnect work and income and wage. And if that is done, then maybe more people will become self-determined. And if you are self-determining, then maybe you would not do work for which there is no value. So how do we think about this? So I'm going to stop here, okay, by opening this question, which is, we spend so much of time, okay, problematizing calculations of work. This should lead us to question, okay, the very notion of work today, particularly when we are, staring at, okay, what is seen as what is going to be the climate disaster. If we don't stop working the way we do, this planet doesn't have a chance. Okay? So how do we think about equality, which saves the planet and allows people to live a good life? So maybe that's the direction in which we may have to think about development. Okay? So I'm going to stop here, and I'll be very happy if there are
So do you have?
I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
So participants, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. Hello.
Yeah. So somebody had asked if I was running a presentation. I had just few slides. So I was just using them as an indicator because I thought there might be something nicer to see on the screen.
If anyone has questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. Yes, Raju.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
This is Karan Dalvi here. I wanted to know if you could discuss a little more about the gender distribution of what we consider to be leisurely activities, as in something that's not considered to be work, and how that essentially affects how we see work as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so when I was talking about self-determination and moving beyond work, obviously it was also pointing towards, okay, how would we think about leisure, okay, right? How much time do we have to spend doing work and what kind of work to be able to think about leisure. Now, leisure is also very skewed. In fact, the same data which talks about, how much time people spend in unpaid work also points out to the amount of time men and women in different parts of the world have for personal grooming, okay, or for leisure. Okay, it has been noted, for instance, that fewer women have, any kind of stretched time for leisure. Okay, one of the things that we did read about in the lockdown was that the already the double burden which was there was additional was added on because everybody was in the same time, in the same place all the time. Okay, what would a feminist understanding of leisure be? Okay, now if you remember the old idea of the trade union movement, then it talked about the 24 hours of the day, okay, as 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, okay, and 8 hours to do what you will. 8 hours to do what you will. So it's yours. Now, one of the things that has been discussed a lot is whether in our times where we have commodified leisure so much, where we think about even spending our free time in ways which involve consumption activities or something or the other. Okay, what does it mean to do what you will? Okay? And what kind of autonomy would you require? My immediate sense would be to then think about the idea of privacy. Wouldn't you require some time with yourself to be able to decide what you want and then engage with others on that? Okay, so I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm just pointing out to this, okay, that if we unless we reduce work, it's not possible to think about leisure. And to reduce work would also mean to be able to redistribute work, redistribute it within the household and redistribute it, reorganize it, in society. And in fact, technology itself points out to certain things on what kind of work gets increased and what kind of work doesn't get increased. Okay, so there's some interesting, uh, research which points out that more people are likely now to, of course, lose jobs because of automation, AI, etc. Okay, but the jobs which are very difficult to replace are caregiving activities. So caregiving jobs are the most irreplaceable, which means that we really have to think about redistribution of care if there has to be leisure for everyone. Okay? I'd love to know what you think about it.
This is what I was actually trying to look towards, and especially the point of autonomy that you talked about, because it's not just about what work you do, but whether you get to decide whether you can do that work or not. And probably there's a certain aspect of, I think, a certain kind of internalized misogyny as well, which also works to a certain extent. But I do not know if I can elaborate much on that.
There would be internalized, of course, because patriarchy as a system, if it has to work, it has to basically convince the people who are most affected by it that they have no other alternative, right? So women as bearers of patriarchy is now a very well sort of documented thing. But look at also other indicators, okay? So for instance, people who've been studying social trends in the past 15, 20 years have been pointing out how young women, okay, want to postpone marriages. Like they want to postpone their wedding. They don't want to get married so soon. They want to go and live in a hostel. They don't want to stay in the family. Okay. The access to the cell phone is very important. Now, what are all of these pointing towards? Some kind of autonomy, freedom, space, okay, to be able to figure out what you are and what you want to be. Okay. Some kind of self-determination. So we have the yearning everywhere. And that will work along with sort of internalized sort of pressures on what is to be done when and who has to work. So both work, to create a lot of, tensions. People live with perpetual guilt, for instance, like a lot of high performing, high paying women in high paying jobs live with a lot of guilt of not having, time enough, or every time they take time off for themselves, then what would that mean? So pointing out to some of those things. Should I just look at some of the questions from the chat?
Yes. You can. Dr. Sandhya was asking something.
Yeah, so a lot of people who now are talking about a basic income, okay, a universal basic income of sorts, okay, are actually trying to point out to this. That is, as long as you are, like, given the unequal systems of, property, resources that we have, okay, right? Work, unpaid and wage work, okay, is going to give most people no time, okay, for being free, for to knowing what they are. So a lot of ideas now which have come in is of something which points out to disassociating it. Make the income a guarantee so that then people can negotiate the conditions of work that they do. So if income is a guarantee, okay, right, then you can then decide what kind of work you want to do for how long, and you would be at a better bargaining position. Okay? We don't even have to think about income. In a country like India, we can even think about make education and health a guarantee, okay, which is not in the private market, where you do not have to spend so much. Parents, most people with children spend a great deal of their income on education, sending children to private schools because they see education as a chance of sort of mobility and a better life. But there's a failure associated with that, okay, which is that you have a state system which is basically being run down. Okay, there has never been a better time for us to think about universal healthcare. Okay, the amount of impoverishment that has happened of even middle class families because of one health emergency. So even that would mean greater autonomy to decide what. Okay? Some people have discussed about housing as some kind of a fundamental right. Okay? That you do not, as long if you have that security, people would not have walked. Millions of people would not have walked miles, thousands of kilometers, if they did not have the worry of paying rent. in the cities where they were working. Okay? These are also ways to think in terms of something which can secure your existence so that then work is negotiated better. Okay? So to me, then that would mean you're in a better position to bargain. Okay? And to determine yourself. Okay? Most people don't, and we also have a value system where the only way we think about having worth is when we think in terms of having a certain kind of income, a certain kind of lifestyle. Okay? We are wedded to consumption and the market. So that would be the sort of shift that we would be looking at. I'm taking Abhishek's question. So one of the things that has been used as calculation is actually what I had pointed to, what's called time use surveys, which is to try and find out how much time do people spend doing different tasks. And then trying to see if those tasks were paid for, okay, what would their value be? If you start calculating, okay, right, all the tasks which is done without a wage, and you say, okay, if you employ somebody to do it and you pay minimum wages, at least, okay, of course, there's another thing of why should, taking care of children be unskilled, brainless work? Okay, why would it be physical? Why is taking care of older people? Why is cooking? Okay, cooking would count as skilled, but when it comes to most cooks who are not employed in, chef or like, in that specific kind of profession, it would not be seen as skilled sort of work. Okay? In the distribution that you have of skilled and unskilled, many times domestic work is not even counted. It's not even listed as something, even as unskilled. Okay. So one of the things is to talk about, time use surveys to have a calculation. Okay. But I'm also sort of, and then this idea of a universal income. Okay. You sort of assume that an individual requires this much to be able to live well. Okay. There's a tension. If it is calculated at the family level, then again we'll have tensions in terms of who gets control over it, etc. Okay. So multiple sort of things are sort of taken into, like they have been like a lot of economists, okay, a lot of welfare economists, for instance, have been trying to engage with some of these questions. To me, if you ask these questions, then you de-link this complex that we have. Okay. Now I am looking at Milind Chavan's question.
Correct.
How can we complicate this issue further by considering on a more axis of discrimination? Definitely. I mean, it is impossible to talk, right, about gender divisions of roles without taking into account, okay, caste divisions, right, in the Indian context, as well as, say, maybe race and ethnicity in other contexts. Okay. When we talk about care work, when we talk about, unskilled, what is classified as unskilled work, okay, a whole lot of that is done by people also belonging to subordinate castes in the radar. Okay, a lot of care work is in fact seen as polluting, okay, and which is a very caste sort of informed idea. So there are a lot of conjunctions between gender and caste on who are the people who are doing this kind of work. So obviously it is impossible to not talk about caste when we are talking about thinking about work and value. Okay. In particular, when we talk about something as low paid work, okay, or routine work or unskilled work, okay, it is necessary to see, okay, which communities it is concentrated in, not only which women it is concentrated in. Okay, so there would be that, okay, and that is the famous sort of division you would have of more women belonging to dominant castes being able to get some kind of time off from unpaid work, okay, because they are able to outsource it to women who belong to subordinate castes, who are also then subordinate classes, okay, right? So the maybe the most backbreaking, okay, the most boring, okay, classified as that, okay, then gets sort of transferred. So there would be, of course, that, and this would also then work with with men. Okay, so if you think about men, for instance, who are employed as live-in house helps, okay, and it's often young boys, okay, and where do they come from? Which networks do they come from? Okay, right. So, and there is a gendering of them too, because those men are not seen then as men; they're seen as effeminate in some ways because they are doing this kind of work. So much of our value system is part of that. I'm looking at the other one.
Yeah, you can take Atika's question, then we can come back to
Who's Atika?
Sandeep.
Okay. Families and societies are based on inequalities.
Correct.
What suggestions do you extend towards? I think people are doing it. I think people are restructuring families. Okay. And what I was pointing out, that many young women don't seem to want to, get married. Okay. Right, may itself be pointing out to how there is an aspiration for something which is different. Okay. How do we think about to restructure families? We'll also have to ask, what does a family provide, which other networks are not able to provide? Why do we turn to the family? Do we have other supportive networks which are considered valuable by us and by in society? Like, one of the things I often think about is that I think that everyone should be doing care work. You don't have to care for just the people who are your friends and family. But what if we just distribute care work? Say everyone has to do a mandatory amount of care work, however they think about it, wherever they are located. Okay. So if I, where I am, spend some time doing care work, okay, then I can also be assured that, okay, my family, which is located somewhere else, will have access to somebody else doing that. Okay. And then we build networks and relationships of that kind. Okay. Are there other ways of thinking about families and communities? That would be a question, and I think Sambhavna in fact is trying to do that when it talks about community and when it tries to talk about a collective. Okay. But we do lack in that. Okay. Right? Family seems to be the anchor. So we'll have to ask, what is it that the family provides? Okay. Or what is the pressure that the family is able to exert, which others are not able to, sort of provide. But friends, equal distribution, partnerships, okay, husband and wife, maybe a collective. Okay. But equality and restructuring will have to go together. You can't restructure without introducing equality. Okay. Otherwise, you will fall on traditional networks which are unequal. So it's a tough sort of question to ask. And I think these are the questions that we must ask. Okay? And people have been pointing towards community, for instance, what are called circular economies, care economies. Okay? Leave the market out of certain transactions. Okay? Some of those ideas are experimented with. Community living, definitely. Okay? But I think the challenge of our times is that we have to think about a form of community living which has space for the individual, which has space for individual autonomy. Otherwise, any other sort of form of community which takes away that space, people are going to resist it. So we'll have to think about what is a meaningful existence, which gives us a lot of space with ourselves and yet keeps us connected with others. So Abhishek, your answer to your question, there can be a pessimist answer and there can be a optimist answer. The pessimist answer is that the distribution of housework within, and particularly the gender distribution of housework, okay, has been really resilient. It's not changed. It has not moved as much, okay, as other things have changed in society. And this is in advanced industrial societies. This is in, societies which are rapidly changing, right? So the concentration of unpaid and housework on women, okay, has proved to be very, very strong. It hasn't gone with socializing, certain experiments that took place in some of the communist countries earlier. Okay? It hasn't gone with higher incomes and the ability to outsource it to the market. And it has led to people feeling something, as I pointed out, perpetual guilt, okay, a sense of unhappiness that a lot of, educated women, for instance, have. And also, at the same time, a lot of women having this aspiration to break the convention norms and hope for a different sort of life. Okay, so that's the pessimist answer, that it's proven very, very resilient. Okay. The optimist one, you have to tell me. There are stories, of course, about how men learned to cook in the past year. Okay, learn to take care of children, learn to monitor them as they were attending online classes. Okay, a lot of men realized how much work there is because they had to do it for 2-3 days. Just 2-3 days, just a week. Remember, the first lockdown was something like 3 weeks. Okay, so something of that sort. Maybe there is something there. Okay, so that's the optimist answer on it.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
I have this question, like looking at the problematic of unskilled, what we consider as unskilled, semi-skilled, or skilled work, and both from the perspective of caste and gender. How do you think it connects to this concept of how the formalized education system views labor?
How did the formalized education system play out with unskilled and skilled? Yeah, so did the education system that we have, okay, reinforce this? Okay, I mean, I am struck by, for instance, some of the reports which came out in the context of the farmers movement, that a lot of young people, men included, in fact, men more, okay, rediscovered farming as something that is a source of pride, okay, in the wake of this movement. Otherwise, their whole aspiration was to leave farming. Okay, so because once you had accessed education, once you had accessed schooling and college, okay, right, and given the value that was there to sort of farming in that, okay, it seemed like something which is not a valuable work. So this shift, in fact, happens with it's both. I mean, it would have something to do with gender, but it also, I can see across it. Okay, you would see that. Could we bring attention to what really is important? And could we do it without, in a sense, romanticizing certain kinds of work? If people want to not do certain traditional professions, could we not, think that they have to do it? Could we think of certain traditional professions as skilled? Okay? And could we think of certain professions as those which nobody should do? Okay? I mean, I can think about, our whole thing with, sewage treatment and manual scavenging, etc., as work that nobody should be doing. We need technology for that. We need better systems of control, of management for that. Okay? So if we valorize something which was before, it may not really help us sort of address these questions. I'm just wondering, I'm thinking through your question, okay, is it possible for us to then say that, okay, look at the value that different kinds of work contributes to, okay, and then see, okay, how it has changed, okay, how it needs to change. And there maybe one can then think in terms of education itself. Okay? So for instance, one of the criticisms of formal education is that it looks down upon certain kinds of work. How do we incorporate it? On the other hand, we have stories and stories now of people who have burnout because they worked in the technology sector or were in the IT profession for 10 years, 15 years, and they left it all back to come back and do farming. Okay? Or who left it all back and to come back and do some kind of craft. Okay? Which had been devalued or which was not considered sort of high end within the education system. Maybe it is time for us to then see what needs to be preserved and what doesn't need to be preserved. What we have in India, I think, is a very, very close connection between your birth, the community, the caste, etc., that you are born in, and the work that you do. Okay? I feel that unless we break that connection, we may not be able to preserve the valuable part of the work. Because if you tell a weaver son that he must be a weaver, or a weaver's daughter that she must be that, because that skill will be lost, it's kind of unfair, isn't it? But how do you keep the skill? Okay. Incorporate it into your systems of education and then allow people to choose. I don't know. I think the future of work is going to be different. And we'll have to answer it. I'm sorry, I have no answers to this. I just have to think through some of these.
Janaki, you can take Sandhya's question.
Yeah.
Sandhya.
I think they're over.
Yes, yes.
To overcome from patriarchal prejudice, communal living might be a solution. Yeah, maybe it's also time to recover some of the models that we have of commune living and see how they worked. Some people have experiences of living in, a commune and what that would mean.
जानकी, आपको एग्जांपल दे सकते हैं करंट डेवलपमेंट पॉलिसी का जो जेंडर इक्वालिटी को प्रमोट करने के लिए गवर्नमेंट द्वारा बनाई जाती हैं, उसके प्रोन्स और कॉन्स के बारे में अगर आप कुछ बात करना चाहें.
अभी जो करनी जो चाहिए वो तो I can, like one of the things I would definitely talk about is land rights. You know, that big image that I showed of these thousands and thousands of women, right? Okay. You know what the thing is? From that stage, women did not talk about land rights. Okay. It is part of our policy in the sense that we now have the government's advertising it, etc. Okay. But so it is there in law. Okay. So how would we do that? Okay. Other, of course, things are how do you improve conditions of. Okay. So one of the important things which has come up now a lot is on safe conditions of work. So sexual harassment, violence. So we do have systems of law on that. Okay. Something which has worked well, we have changes. Some things which have worked well, perhaps even unintentionally. I think a lot of panchayats now have young women who help in the teaching of in the government schools. Okay? And apparently that has led to a lot of improvement in, like there are now data which kind of comes out, that it has led to a lot of improvement in learning outcomes. Okay. So where they have, you know, appointed girls from the region who have undertaken, who are educated, but who then work with the local government school and with the children. Okay? So apparently that's kind of a great sort of result in that. Okay? Some other policies, I think our enrollment on education has been pretty impressive. Okay? Kerala has very good records on a number of these things. We also have one of the things which has been again important has been the Forest Rights Act, under which a lot of women have actually organized within that framework to then collect forest produce and sell it, and that gives them an income. So there has been success on that in different parts. Okay? Not everywhere, of course, the law is not implemented everywhere, but wherever there has been some kind of activism, wherever people have managed to mobilize, okay, and form a collective, then they have actually been able to use this policy to sort of implement.
So if we don't have other questions, we can wrap up this session.
No one from your
We'll ask.
whatever is interested.
Okay. ठीक है, ये जो सवाल था, आखिरी सवाल, ये ईडी की तरफ से आया था.
अच्छा, ओके.
शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत इस सेशन को फैसिलिटेट करने के लिए. इट वाज अ वंडरफुल सेशन. और सभी पार्टिसिपेंट्स का भी हम लोग शुक्रिया करते हैं जिन्होंने पार्टिसिपेट किया, और हम लोग और इसी तरह के सेशंस आगे भी करते रहेंगे. थैंक यू सो मच जानकी एंड एवरीवन. थैंक यू.